Welcome to the Celestial Saga channel. What if the simplest technology can become the most dangerous weapon in the galaxy? Today we will find out how primitive people surprise the most powerful civilizations, threatening their absolute superiority. You can't be serious, Federal Primax Harlan muttered, eyeing the entry form with evident disgust. Kinetics? Kinetics, Talon confirmed. They throw metal projectiles. I know what kinetic weapons are, Talon. The Primax snorted. What I don't understand is why humans would even bother entering one of the galaxy's most prestigious weapon exhibitions. He glared down at the application, and why they'd be allowed to at all. They've only been spacefaring for 20 revolutions. Talon fluttered his wings, the Zist equivalent of a shrug. They enjoy throwing rocks, it's worked for them so far. With another frustrated grunt, Primax Harlan muttered, Rocks? They might as well be hurling their own waste, a bunch of primitives. He reached for the rejection stamp. I think we should at least see what they've got to offer, Great Primax, Talon suggested. I've been hearing disturbing rumors from the frontier. No one cares about the frontier, Talon, the Primax snapped. He slammed the rejection stamp onto the human's application. That's a place for bugs, outlaws, and refugees. Nobody of importance goes there. Talon ignored the jab at his species. The humans are there, Primax, he said. They've set up several colonies. Doesn't matter, Harlan repeated. He slammed down another rejection stamp for good measure. They're irrelevant. Their colonies are thriving, Harlan, Talon insisted. They've found a way around our nullifiers. The Primax paused in the act of handing the rejection form back. They did what? Nullifiers were considered the height of weapons technology, devices that could detect and disable any weapon within a certain radius. Some of the advanced models could even target specific individuals, allowing allies to keep their weapons functional while shutting down those of their enemies. Nullifiers were tightly regulated by the Federation, and even Harlan had only managed to acquire a few. Talon clicked his antennae together. In the last 2 months, 7 outlaw gangs have been eliminated around the frontier, all of them in the same manner. Harlan leaned back in his chair, absently brushing his silvering fur. Once bright orange, the fur of Phylaxians like him had aged to a distinguished silver hue, a sign of experience and wisdom. He'd always made sure it stayed soft and well kept. Go on, he muttered. The method was always the same. Talon continued, bits of metal, thrown at high speed. In almost every case, there were no witnesses, and no one has claimed responsibility for the killings. The only link between the gangs, other than their outlaw status, is that they all recently raided human colonies. Is that so? Harlan's mind turned, wondering why he'd seen a decline in his lucrative black market weapon sales. Some of his wealthier clients had stopped purchasing from him, and he'd even considered scaling back his operations. Was the Federation looking into this? You said almost every case, Harlan added. Yes. Talon clacked his antennae again, a habit that Harlan had come to find almost endearing. Despite his distaste for bugs, Talon had proven to be a useful assistant. That last case involved a man named Damian Pierce. The Zist continued. Damian Pierce. Harlan sat up straighter, his attention peaked. Damian had been one of his top clients, an arrogant noble from the Azure house of the Grotto nobility, spoiled, entitled, and cruel, just like most in his position. Damian had spent a small fortune on Harlan's weaponry, seeking to wreak havoc on the Prim's. Damian Pierce Azure. That Damian? Yes, Primax, Talon said. Both the Feds and the Azure House conducted their investigations. They discovered it was the work of a human. A human? Harlan blinked in disbelief. Wait, just one human? It appears so, Talon affirmed. The human arrived at Kental Station in an unregistered ship. He killed 23 outlaws near their ships, and then found Damian and 3 others in a local cantina. The bartender's cybernetics recorded the whole thing. Talon handed Harlan a hollow recorder, which displayed the footage of a man effortlessly gunning down 4 people. The human is quick, Harlan muttered, but those weapons aren't anything special. He paused, his 3 eyebrows furrowing. Wait, Damian had a nullifier. Yes, Talon confirmed. We verified that it was active during the shootout. And yet the guns fired regardless? Harlan replayed the footage, his mind working quickly. The human's weapons didn't appear overly destructive. Even a basic plasma caster could do more damage. But in the human's hands, they were still lethal. That's right, Talon said. These weapons don't require a power source, they're chemically propelled. Chemically. Harlan frowned. Yes. Each cartridge contains a chunk of metal and a small explosive charge that propels the projectile. It's basically small explosions used to throw rocks. Harlan stroked his fur thoughtfully. It was crude, almost as primitive as rubbing two sticks together to create fire. And yet no power source? No power source at all, Talon confirmed. His antennae twitched with excitement. Not only do they bypass our nullifiers, but they don't even register as weapons in security scans, at least. Not yet. Very interesting, Harlan muttered. Pondering the possibilities, nullifiers had always been the Federation's ultimate control. If his kind had had such weapons during the bug hunt, it wouldn't have been called the bug hunt, Talon finished for him. We would have won. Don't get too bold, Bug, Harlan warned. He glared at Talon until the Zist lowered his antennae in submission. Harlan leaned back. Considering the implications, you might be onto something. Though a primitive ranged weapon that can bypass both security and nullifiers could fetch a fortune, several fortunes, in fact. He glanced down at the rejected application form. We might just have to let these primitive creatures in after all. I made an extra copy of their application, Talon said, with a slight flutter of his wings. Just in case, Primox Harlan would spend the next 3 months studying humans, or rather, he would make Talon do it. What Harlan discovered was less than encouraging. The humans were far more primitive than he had imagined. They had attempted, and failed, to terraform the planet closest to them, abandoning the project after only a few decades of fruitless effort. Their hyperdrive was a clumsy, barely functional mistake, and they had used that sorry excuse for faster-than-light travel to waste the next 60 revolutions attempting to colonize planets that no other species would even consider. Even the bugs understood that there was a stark difference between a planet that was nearly habitable and one that actually was. Unfortunately, that was a lesson the humans still hadn't grasped. The humans didn't even have a unified government. Their homeworld was split into over 200 separate nations. And at that moment, there were no fewer than 19 full-scale wars raging. When the humans encountered the Federal United Worlds, they only spiraled further into internal strife. Nations, corporations, and wealthy individuals all scrambled to send envoys into the big empty, begging, borrowing, or even stealing technology from their more advanced counterparts. The only good news, if Harlan wanted to call it that, was that no one was interested in trading with them. No one wanted to deal with a species that was little more than dung-smeared primitives. Earth was a backwater planet, situated in a dull corner of the galaxy. It only had the most basic of resources, and there wasn't a useful spatial anomaly within 100 light-years of its space. Nobody even cared enough to conquer the lunkers. The humans were weak, slow to reproduce, and even slower to mature. Their intelligence was so low that it was almost miraculous they had even achieved sapience. Harlan could hardly imagine a more worthless species. Even the bugs were more advanced than this. Harlan desperately wanted to ban humans from his expo. Their disorganized, chaotic nature, coupled with their pathetic attempts at kinetics, would only tarnish the reputation of the galaxy's greatest weapons exhibition. However, the firearms the humans were producing were too valuable an opportunity to ignore. He was far too prominent a figure to try to contact them secretly. There were too many spies and too much risk of his competitors catching wind of it. Harlan intended to fleece those primitive creatures for all they were worth, and that wouldn't happen if they thought they had any other options. As the exhibition date drew nearer, Primox Harlan's mood only worsened. The very thought of those weak, primitive humans sullying his pristine expo drove him to distraction. Talon bore the brunt of his frustration, but soon, everyone on the staff was walking on eggshells around him. Harlan didn't care. He unloaded on anyone who happened to cross his path. The only time he made any effort to calm down was when he was at home, and that was only because 3 of his wives threatened to leave him. 2 weeks before the expo, Harlan received an unexpected call. It was Primox Soren Wexler. Primox Soren, a Grotto noble, would also be judging at the exhibition. He appeared on the viewer with his usual scowl. Soren was a massive green creature, broad and tall, with a body covered in thick armored plates. Like all Grotto nobles, his carapace was engraved with sigils and gold filigree, and like most of them, he was an insufferable individual. "This is an outrage, Harlan," Soren bellowed the moment Harlan accepted the call. "I demand an explanation." "Everything's an outrage with you, Soren," Harlan sighed, rolling all 3 of his eyes. You'll need to be more specific. Humans, Soren shouted. You're letting humans into the exhibition? You're just noticing this now? Harlan raised two of his eyebrows in mock surprise. I approved their application months ago. Perhaps you should pay more attention, old friend. Don't call me that, Soren snapped. I'm no friend of yours. No friends? Harlan placed his hands over his neck as though shocked. The Grottos were very particular about interpersonal relationships, and calling one a friend without their explicit consent was considered a grave insult. Harlan did it on purpose at every opportunity. I'm wounded, Soren. Really, enough of your games, Soren growled. Antagonizing a Grotto noble was never a wise idea for most people, but even Soren wouldn't dare lay a hand on a fellow Primox. The Federal United Worlds had strict rules against physical conflict among high-ranking officials. I rejected the humans. Primox clean rejected them too. You're the only one who approved their entry, Soren demanded. Why? Curiosity mostly, Harlan drawled. They're an interesting species. Don't play primitive with me, Harlan, Soren warned. You're the only Primox more arrogant than I am, and I've had bowel movements more fascinating than these humans. I wouldn't be so sure about that, old friend, Harlan smirked. You've heard about Damian Pierce Azur, haven't you? The former heir of House Azur? Soren snorted, smiling despite himself. I've heard. Gunned down by a human? Can you imagine the shame? A single human killed Damian Pierce Azur, along with 26 heavily armed outlaws, Harlan said. Doesn't that sound like a species worth meeting? Undoubtedly, Soren waved the thought away. The rest of the humans have been easy targets. Even your species occasionally produces a capable warrior, an exceptional outlier, Harlan countered. The Damian Pierce gang was just one of 12 that this human has eliminated. 4 of the House Azur's strike teams have also been found riddled with holes. I know, Soren barked. Oh, what I wouldn't give to see the look on Bron Azur's face. Not that he'd dare show it right now, he laughed harder. Yes, quite amusing. Harlan allowed himself a small smile. Then, considering the human's unique nature, he frowned. What are they calling him again? The lead dealer, Soren replied with a chuckle. Stupid name. Considering what this lead dealer has achieved, Harlan continued, I thought it wise to meet his species in person. I want to see if there's more to them than meets the eye. You mean you want to see if they have any technology worth stealing? Soren muttered. Harlan scowled in response. That's no good reason to be ruining our expo, Harlan, Soren shouted. Knowledge is power, Harlan replied evenly, locking eyes with him. The Federation might be complacent about a new species entering the galaxy, but I'm not. If these humans pose a threat, it's better to know now than later. A threat? Soren sneered. Those Prims? You're becoming paranoid in your old age, Harlan. They can't even get their government in order. Their ships are barely fit for space travel. They're nothing. We said the same thing about the Zist, Harlan reminded him. Soren grunted, narrowing his eyes. I think you're skimming me, Phylaxian. You've never been one for patriotism. You're loyal to your bank accounts and nothing else. That may be true, Harlan said with a smile. But entry into the ship-mounted weapons category of the exhibition is solely at my discretion. The humans will be joining, and there's nothing you can do about it. Do you really think they'll have anything worth seeing? Soren scoffed. No, Harlan admitted. I think they'll be a complete embarrassment if they manage to present something even resembling a real weapon. I'll eat my own fur. Is that so? Soren grinned maliciously. Well, damn. Now I'll have to root for those lunkers. I'd love to see that. I'm sure you would, Harlan harumphed. But they're coming, and there's no stopping it. I'll be happy to tell Cathene the same thing if she decides to call. She won't, Soren assured him. She hates you even more than I do. Good, Harlan sneered. Now, if you're done wasting my time, some of us have real work to do. Goodbye, old friend, Soren snarled. But Harlan cut off the call before the Grotto could respond further. The humans arrived 4 days before the expo was set to begin. After reviewing Talon's scan of their ship, Harlan was astonished they had made it that far. The ship was attractive enough at first glance. It was 300 meters long, with a sleek rectangular hull adorned with graceful curves. Gun ports and missile launchers were clearly designed to give it a fearsome appearance. One weapon stretched across the entire upper spine of the ship, extending 10 extra meters beyond its body. A fine-looking vessel. If you were an unknowing fool, Harlan took one look and nearly ordered them turned away on the spot. Or better yet, blasted out of the sky. The hyperdrive was laughably basic, barely functional, and so slow that the humans must have started their journey 2 months ago just to make it in time. The ship had no inertial dampeners, no artificial gravity, and no armor. It relied solely on chemical propulsion to maneuver. There wasn't even a singularity reactor. The lunkers had to use nuclear fission to power it. Inefficient fission that Harlan could see no logical reason why they'd need 10 nuclear reactors to power such a scrap heap. He calmed himself by focusing on the potential profit. No matter how weak, foolish, or revolting these primitives were, they had weapons capable of bypassing nullifiers. Harlan wanted those weapons. He wanted them badly. If it meant swallowing his dignity and rubbing elbows with these bumbling savages, he would do it. Harlan didn't contact the human ship himself, nor did he have Talon do it. Instead, he instructed Talon to have his assistant ask a subordinate to make the contact. Harlan doubted the humans would even notice the slight. He was certain they didn't have the means to make an issue of it. If they did, several hours later, a delegation of humans was led into Harlan's office. The office was pristine, large, lavish, and tasteful, with walls lined with rows upon rows of accomplishments and accolades. Harlan sat behind a desk made entirely of grugshell, in a chair that might as well have been a throne. A dozen armed guards stood watch outside at all times, but their presence wasn't truly necessary. Harlan controlled the automated defenses with a neural link. Anyone who dared to cause trouble would be vaporized on his command. There were 3 humans. One was a tall male dressed in a military uniform. The second, a short female wearing black pants, a white blouse, and a black jacket. The third was a short male dressed in a brand new white shirt, white pants, and a long white coat. None of them were armed, and all of them were ugly. Their fur was only present above their eyes, and at the top of their heads. Disgusting. The humans knelt, each tapping the center of their chest 3 times in respect. They waited for Harlan to speak. At least they were polite. After a brief pause, Harlan finally spoke. "Rise and be noticed." The humans stood. Even the shortest among them was taller than Harlan, but his elevated chair allowed him to look down on them. The female spoke first. "Greetings, Great Primox. I'm Lydia Park, Executive Liaison for Interstellar Incorporated." She motioned to the tall male beside her. "This is Commander Ethan Shaw of the USS Glorious Purpose. And this," she pointed to the short male on her left, "is Dr. Lucas Grant from Research and Development." Lydia, Commander, and Dr. Harlan committed their names to memory before swallowing his disgust and offering a polite smile. "It's a pleasure to meet you all," he said, motioning to himself. "You know who I am." He then gestured to Talon, standing beside his desk. "This is Talon, my personal assistant and chief of staff." "Thank you, Great Primox," Lydia smiled warmly, "and thank you for this opportunity. The other judges rejected our applications, but you've given us a chance." "Opportunity indeed," Harlan replied, his voice dry. While the prize for a good showing was only a few 100 million gudongs, the publicity and potential contracts could make or break a company. Harlan still wasn't convinced that the lead dealer's weapons were worth giving these primitive humans such a chance. However, he knew he had to remain diplomatic. Leaning forward with a conspiratorial look, he whispered, "The other judges are fools." He glanced around to ensure privacy, but I wouldn't say that outside of this office. "Of course, Great Primox," Lydia replied, lowering her gaze and brushing her hair with a demure gesture. "Don't do that," Harlan snapped, barely able to suppress his disgust. "Oh," Lydia looked up quickly, apologizing. "I'm sorry, Great Primox, I was told that was a gesture of respectful submission." "It is," Harlan responded, raising 2 of his eyebrows, "but only if you're seeking a husband." Her face flashed with embarrassment, followed quickly by anger, before smoothing out again. She tapped her chest twice in apology. "My apologies, Great Primox," she said. "That's not how the gesture is used," Harlan informed her, watching her with a mix of pity and irritation. The poor, gullible humans. He concealed his amusement, letting only frustration seep into his tone. "I suggest you stop trying to use Phylaxian idioms, and I would also advise you to find whoever taught them to you and shoot that lunker in the face." He scowled. "They've clearly misled you, as a joke, no doubt." "I see," Lydia muttered, her face reddening again, but quickly regaining composure. She bent at the waist. "Thank you, Great Primox." "Drop the great," Harlan ordered, his tone cold. "Just Primox, or Primex Harlan, if you wish to be formal." "Yes, Primox." Lydia nodded sharply. "Better." Harlan sat back, appraising the humans with a more composed expression. "Now, I'm a busy man," Harlan continued, "so I'll keep this brief. While I'm willing to give you a chance, I'm doing so with an ulterior motive. The humans exchanged a look, and Lydia spoke up. And what might that be, Primox? Harlan leaned forward, his voice lowering. Are you familiar with the human known as the lead dealer? The lead dealer? Lydia's face scrunched in confusion, while the doctor's eyes widened in disbelief. You mean the lead dealer is real? The doctor asked. I thought it was just a story, Lydia added. Harlan nodded, his expression serious. A vigilante, or perhaps an assassin. We're not entirely sure, but what we do know is that he has killed nearly 200 people all by himself. Oh, Lydia fell silent for a moment, deep in thought. Did you want us to help you find him somehow? The authorities will catch him in time, Harlan lied smoothly, though the Federation had no interest in the frontier. They couldn't care less about the outlaws terrorizing the human colonies, and they definitely didn't care about a primitive human mowing them down. No, what I'm really interested in are the weapons he's using. What can you tell me about a tungsten sabot thrower? Sabot? Lydia furrowed her brow in confusion. Harlan had marked her as the leader of the group, but she seemed surprisingly ignorant, though perhaps that shouldn't have been so surprising given her species. I mean sabot, Commander Ethan Shaw corrected, a tungsten sabot. It's pronounced sabot, unless you're some kind of yokel. Harlan fixed a sharp, pointed gaze on Commander Ethan Shaw. And what can you tell me about this sabot? It's a type of ammunition, the commander said. A sabot is a support device attached to a projectile to keep it aligned in the barrel of a gun. It's used in artillery sometimes, but more commonly in shotguns? Harlan prompted one of our oldest and most versatile firearms, the commander explained. This time, it was the doctor who spoke. Shotguns can use a wide variety of ammunition, pellets, explosives, incendiaries. He gave a slight smile, and armor-piercing sabot rounds, of course, shotguns. Harlan nodded slowly, piecing it together. That must be it. He noted Lydia's confusion and continued. Before I became a federal Primox, I owned a weapons manufacturing company. I'm something of a connoisseur when it comes to weapons. Primox weren't allowed to own businesses, as it was considered a conflict of interest. Luckily for Harlan, his fellow feds were just as corrupt as he was, so no one raised an eyebrow when he signed the company over to his wives. And you'd like to see some of ours? Lydia asked. I would, Harlan confirmed. I'll be honest. Human kinetics aren't highly regarded in the Federation. Your weapons would be considered quaint at best. He steepled his fingers. Still, I believe there's a market for them. If nothing else, I'd enjoy adding a few to my collection. Lydia gave Commander Ethan Shaw a thoughtful look. You know, Lydia began, the Glorious Purpose has an extensive armory. No, Commander Ethan Shaw responded firmly. What do you mean, no? Lydia demanded, puzzled. The Glorious Purpose is a military vessel of the European Union, Commander Ethan Shaw reminded her. We can't give away our ordnance. This is a joint venture, Ethan Shaw, Lydia countered. I have full discretion. Not with our ordnance, you don't. Commander Ethan Shaw was firm. Wait a minute, the doctor interrupted, his voice rising in disbelief. Are you telling me the only guns you have are in the ship's armory? Where else would they be? Commander Ethan Shaw raised an eyebrow. You've got to be kidding me, the doctor muttered in shock. What do you mean? Lydia asked. What I mean, the doctor said slowly, almost shouting in his frustration, is we just traveled for 5 goddamn months to visit the biggest weapons exhibition in the goddamn universe. He paused, pointing to the others. And none of you thought to bring any damn guns? Harlan's gaze locked onto the doctor. Did you? The doctor grinned. Of course I did. I'm not an idiot. I've got enough to set up a booth if I wanted to. I can't authorize a booth, Harlan replied coldly. I only have jurisdiction over ship-mounted weapons at the expo. Harlan flashed the human a smile. But I'm quite interested in acquiring some of your hardware. That can be arranged, the human replied. Lydia spoke up. Interstellar Inc. is a tech company focused on space travel. We don't manufacture firearms, but I have contacts I can connect you with. Excellent, Harlan gave a satisfied nod, though his gaze briefly shifted back to the doctor with a slight grimace. Unfortunately, I won't have time to examine your wares myself. The expo will be keeping me quite busy. My assistant will meet with you instead. He pointed at Lydia Talon. Will coordinate with you as well. We'd like to meet your contacts. Harlan glanced at the time on his desk clock, making a show of it. I'm afraid this is all the time I have for this meeting. You may go now. The next 5 days were a whirlwind of activity. As one of the 3 acting judges, Primox Harlan was required to attend numerous weapons demonstrations. It was a task he enjoyed, even if the latest models were only marginally different from those of the previous year. True innovation was rare these days. It was far easier and more profitable to tack on a few flashy features to an existing weapon and charge more for it. Still, Harlan loved guns. He liked watching others shoot as much as he liked shooting himself. As an added bonus, there were no humans in sight. The other Primoxes had banned them from entering the expo. Harlan had made a token protest, but secretly, he was pleased to avoid having those primitive creatures ruining his pristine gun convention. The downside was that Talon was spending much of his time on the human ship, leaving Harlan with backup assistants to manage his schedule. Harlan understood the necessity, but it still irritated him. He hadn't realized how smooth and efficient Talon truly was, until he was forced to do without him. On the 6th day, the ship-mounted weapons exhibition finally began. Primox Harlan sat in judgment alongside Soren Wexler, and Kathleen was a Scarlac, one of the few species uglier than humans and bugs. She had 6 arms, 2 of which ended in pincers, 6 legs, and a 2-meter tail with a venomous stinger. Her exoskeleton was a sickly yellow, and her 6-faceted eyes glowed a nauseating orange. She was also the most unpleasant being Harlan had ever worked with. So, the Scarlac sneered. Or at least she sounded like she was sneering. Mandibles weren't particularly expressive. The time has finally come, the event that will surely embarrass us all. Only if you're easily embarrassed, Harlan countered. You wouldn't be embarrassed by such filth, would you? Kathleen dripped with disdain. Humans, really? Complain all you want, Harlan scowled at the creature. Ship-mounted weapons are my responsibility, and I've decided to give them a chance. How much did they pay for this chance? Kathleen hissed, her mandibles clacking. How many gudongs are enough to sully this exhibition? Or maybe they offered more than money. Has one of them agreed to be your plaything, Harlan? Has exploiting your secretaries grown so dull that you're now looking outside your species? Harlan fantasized about turning the Scarlac into a pile of ash. It's always such a pleasure talking to you, Kathleen, the Primox deadpanned. I think about you often, you know. I don't, Kathleen spat. I do, Harlan insisted. Every time I smell feces, your name comes to mind. Soren. Wexler spoke up, breaking the tension. I'm glad the humans are here. The other two turned to stare at the grotto. You are? Kathleen clacked in disbelief. Why? I'm hoping those lunkers surprise us. Soren Wexler grinned. Harlan promised to eat his own fur if they do. The judges continued to bicker as the first entry moved into position. A Geelong-class battlecruiser courtesy of Stinger Industries, Katheen's company, though she didn't officially own it. Harlan watched the view screen as the long, slender vessel approached the target. The target was a cube of pure inviolium. 10 meters across, inviolium was the most durable material ever recorded, an alloy of exotic elements compressed to extreme density. Its invention had revolutionized ship-to-ship combat. The alloy's melting point was so high that an armored vessel could skim the surface of a star without harm, and its strength was such that a mere millimeter of inviolium made a ship immune to both explosives and kinetics. The invention of inviolium had transformed space combat into a calculated slugfest. No weapon could penetrate the armor in a single strike. Only repeated blows from high-energy weapons could wear it down, but even then they had to strike the same spot dozens, if not hundreds of times. There were drawbacks. Of course, inviolium was highly radioactive. Ships using it had to implement strict shielding to protect their interior, and armored vessels weren't permitted on planets without a thorough inspection of their external containment. Despite these issues, the alloy's utility was undeniable. Harlan gave the order to proceed. The battlecruiser opened fire. 100 glowing balls of white light streaked toward the target. Antimatter. Scarlacs loved antimatter weapons. When antimatter collided with normal matter, it triggered an annihilation effect, creating an explosion. Scarlacs were fond of explosions. The balls of light moved in perfect formation, striking the cube in sequence. 100 explosions filled the view screen. When the light subsided, Harlan asked, "Effect?" A depression in the target, one of the technicians reported, 20 centimeters wide, 14 millimeters deep. Impressive, Primox, Kathleen preened. Not really, Harlan muttered. The damage is enough to destroy a small, lightly armored craft, but antimatter is highly susceptible to point defense. A simple laser can destabilize the field, holding it in place, and a particle beam can make it detonate prematurely. Harlan leaned forward, addressing the battlecruiser's captain. Your antimatter projectiles need to be at least 6 times faster to be effective in combat. As it stands, the enemy will likely detonate them before they even leave your guns. I rate it a 7.6 out of 10. Harlan is just jealous of your damage output, Cathene scoffed. I rated a 9.9, she added, clearly pleased with herself. It's as much a danger to your ship as it is to the enemy, Krell said, his tone flat. But the damage is impressive. I'll give you an 8.5. The demonstrations continued. Ship after ship fired the best cannons their companies could produce. Guided plasma balls, phase disruptors, molecular disintegration rays. None of the other weapons dealt as much raw damage as Cathene's cruiser, but several others earned higher ratings overall. The humans went last. Cathene clacked her mandibles in irritation, and Krell scowled when the human representative stood before them. Lydia, Commander, and Doctor all bowed in unison. Don't waste our time with pleasantries, Prince, the Scarlac hissed. Get on with it. The commander looked to Harlan, who gave a single subtle nod. Commander Ethan Shaw spoke into his communicator. Fire. The glorious purpose lurched. The human ship suddenly moved backward at nearly 6 meters per second. Recoil? Harlan frowned, but the explosion that followed immediately drew his attention away from the human's odd vessel. The cube was gone. All that remained were rapidly scattering chunks of shrapnel. What the, Premox Krell's mouth hung open in disbelief. Harlan nearly went slack-jawed himself, but he kept his composure long enough to ask, if X? Stand by, Great Primox, the technician interrupted. The judges waited. After 2 minutes. The technician spoke again. The weapon penetrated 326 meters into the target, then detonated. The target has been destroyed. The target has been destroyed? Harlan echoed, shocked. No one had ever said those words about an inviolium cube. Mew! Lunker! Krell jabbed a finger at Commander Ethan Shaw. Explain. The weapon is called a railgun. Great Primox, Commander Ethan Shaw explained. It uses magnets to rapidly accelerate a projectile. This particular projectile was packed full of antimatter, which detonated on impact. Impossible, Cathene sputtered. No projectile can pierce inviolium. It's the strongest substance in existence. There's an old Earth saying, the doctor chimed in, holding up a small object, a riddle our engineers like to share. That's a ridiculous question. Cathene hissed. The answer is 1, Primox, Cathene. The human grinned. Just 1, at sufficient velocity. Cathene looked as though she might leap down and rip the human apart. Harlan intervened. And how fast did you throw that projectile? 612 kilometers per second, the doctor replied proudly. He frowned slightly. That's the best we can do. Any faster, and the recoil would destroy the ship. How could that scrap heap even survive that much energy? Cathene demanded. It wasn't easy, the doctor admitted. Reinforcing the ship and protecting the crew was harder than building the gun itself. Even now, I wouldn't risk more than a dozen shots without a complete refurbish. Primox Soren Wexler burst into laughter, drawing the attention of the other judges. Outstanding. The Grotto bellowed, absolutely outstanding. He nearly collapsed from the force of his guffaws. I rated a 10 out of 10, Cathene hissed at Soren Wexler. A perfect score? Why would you? She trailed off, staring at Harlan. She too began to laugh. Yes, I agree. A perfect 10. What? Harlan looked between them, confused. It took the Primox several seconds to realize what was happening. When he did, he gave them his most dignified expression. Words cannot express how much I hate the two of you. Primox Soren Wexler managed to suppress his laughter long enough to yell, Quit stalling, Lunker! Tell these prims how you rate their weapon! Harlan glared down at the humans. Those firearms better make him the richest Phylaxian in history. Even then, he wasn't sure it was worth it. Grudgingly, Harlan gave his judgment. It's the most powerful ship-mounted weapon I've ever seen, but it comes with significant drawbacks. I rated a 9.6. Then, with as much dignity as he could muster, Federal Primox Harlan yanked a handful of fur off his arm and stuffed it into his mouth, chewing thoughtfully.